I'm sorry, but we didn't invite you. My mother said it softly, too softly, as if lowering her voice could soften the meaning. We were standing in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she used to pack my school lunches and hum old Motown songs under her breath. The late afternoon sun spilled through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the table. Everything looked warm, familiar, safe, except it wasn't. I remember the faint smell of lemon cleaner on the counters and the way her fingers kept folding and unfolding the edge of a dish towel. She wouldn't look at me. It's a small gathering, she added. Close friends, immediate family. I stood there, still holding the bakery box I'd brought, a lemon pound cake she liked. My hands suddenly felt too big for my body. I am immediate family, I said. My voice didn't crack. I'm proud of that. It stayed steady, even though something inside me had already started splintering. My father was at the table, pretending to read the newspaper. He hadn't turned the page once. It's complicated, he muttered. That word, complicated. I felt my throat tighten. It's your 40th anniversary. We know that, my mother said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were red around the edges. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder. I nodded slowly, as if I understood, as if I were the unreasonable one for being hurt. I placed the cake on the counter, smoothed my jacket, and told them, okay, I won't. But I didn't leave, because in my car, sitting on the passenger seat, was a gift box I had spent 6 months preparing, and they had no idea what was inside. Before that afternoon, I would have told anyone that I had a good relationship with my parents. Not perfect, not storybook, but steady. I'm their only child. I grew up in a small brick house on Maplewood Drive. My father worked long hours as a mechanic, and my mother ran a daycare out of our home. There was always noise, children laughing, cartoons playing, pots clanging in the kitchen. We weren't wealthy, but we were warm. Sunday dinners were sacred. My father would carve the roast with quiet concentration, and my mother would insist I take the last dinner roll, even when she clearly wanted it herself. We had traditions, rituals, the kind that make you believe you belong somewhere. When I got married in my late 20s, my parents were thrilled. My husband Daniel fit right in. He'd sit with my father in the garage, talking about engines. My mother would pull me aside and whisper, "He's a good one." But life doesn't stay suspended in its happiest moments. Daniel and I divorced after 12 years. No scandal, just erosion, the kind that happens slowly, like water wearing down stone. We didn't fight loudly, we just stopped choosing each other. When the divorce finalized, my parents tried to be supportive, but I felt something shift. They never said it outright, but I could see the disappointment in my mother's tight smile, the way my father avoided conversations about my next steps. They'd loved the image of us, the stable couple, the Sunday visitors, the grandchildren they assumed would come. When those expectations dissolved, so did something else. I moved into a small townhouse 20 minutes away. I kept my job at the local library. My life became quieter. And yet, I still showed up. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesday dinners when my mother said she'd made too much soup. I called them every Sunday evening at 6. It was routine. That's why the anniversary party didn't make sense. 2 months before that kitchen conversation, my mother had casually mentioned they were thinking about doing something small for their 40th. "Just dinner at the community hall," she'd said while stirring a pot of chili. "Nothing fancy." I offered to help plan. She declined. "I've got it under control." At the time, I didn't think much of it, but then little things began to surface. A neighbor congratulated me in the grocery store. "Your parents' party sounds lovely. I hear there'll be music." "Music?" I forced a smile. "Yes, I think so." Later that week, I called my mother. "Are you hiring a band?" I asked lightly. There was a pause, a beat too long. "Oh, yes, just a small trio. Someone from church recommended them." "That sounds nice," I said. She didn't ask if I'd be there. Another time I stopped by unannounced and saw stacks of folded invitations on the dining room table. My father quickly covered them with a magazine. "We're still finalizing the list," he said. I remember the way my stomach dropped, not dramatically, just a subtle sinking, like missing a step in the dark. I told myself I was being sensitive. After all, I was divorced now, no husband, no children. Maybe they thought I wouldn't enjoy a room full of couples reminiscing about 40 decades of marriage. Maybe they were trying to protect me. That's what I told myself. Until that afternoon in the kitchen, when the truth was no longer implied, it was spoken. "We didn't invite you." The words echoed long after I left their house. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The gift box on the passenger seat seemed heavier than before. It was wrapped in cream paper with a navy ribbon. Inside were photographs, letters, and something else, something I had gone to great lengths to recover, something that belonged to us all. I could have driven home. I could have accepted their decision, licked my wounds, and mailed the gift with a polite note. But I didn't, because as much as it hurt, I knew this wasn't about space or simplicity. It was about something deeper, and I was going to find out what. I started the engine. The anniversary was 3 days away, and whether they liked it or not, I planned to be there. I didn't sleep much in the nights leading up to the anniversary. My mind wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, that careful neutrality she wore like armor, as if kindness could disguise rejection. And my father, staring at his newspaper like it was a shield. The hurt came in waves. Sometimes it felt like a dull ache. Other times it burned. But underneath it all was confusion, because nothing, absolutely nothing in my life had prepared me to believe that my own parents could shut me out. Still, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe they just wanted to avoid awkward questions about my divorce. Maybe they didn't want me to feel lonely at a couple's celebration. Maybe it wasn't personal. But every maybe rang hollow, because if it truly wasn't personal, why hide it? Why whisper in their kitchen instead of explaining? On Wednesday night, 3 days before the party, I called my aunt, my mother's younger sister, Ellen. Aunt Ellen had always been the bridge between my parents and me. She was soft-spoken but sharp, a woman who noticed things others ignored. When she picked up, I could hear the faint hum of her TV in the background. "Sweetheart," she said, her tone warm. "You all right?" I hesitated. "Did you get an invitation to Mom and Dad's anniversary?" "Of course," she said lightly. Then, after a pause, "Wait, you didn't?" "No." There was a silence so long I thought the call had dropped. "Oh, honey," she whispered finally. "I don't know what's going on, but that doesn't sound right. Do you know who's organizing it? I thought your mom was, but lately it's been more of your father's thing. He's been at the community hall every other evening, said he's helping someone with decorations. I assumed it was you." It wasn't. I thanked her, hung up, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floorboards. My father had always been the quieter one between my parents, gentle but firm, the kind of man who fixed things rather than talk about them. If he was behind this decision, it wasn't just about a guest list. It was deliberate. The next morning, I drove by the community hall. It sat at the edge of town, a squat brick building with ivy creeping up one side and a banner that read, "Happy 40th, Thomas and Diane." Through the windows, I could see tables being set up, fairy lights strung across the ceiling. I parked across the street and watched for a while. My father's truck was there, so was my mother's silver sedan, but there was another car too, a dark blue SUV I didn't recognize. A few minutes later, my father came out carrying a box of decorations. Behind him was a woman, blonde, mid-40s, stylish. She laughed at something he said and touched his arm lightly before walking back inside. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't suspicion. It was more like the moment before a storm, when the air feels wrong, too still, too heavy. When my father drove away, I sat in the car for another 10 minutes, watching that woman through the window as she hung photos on the wall. My parents' photos, their wedding picture, family vacations, my high school graduation. And then, curiously, one of her standing next to them at a picnic table holding a glass of wine. My chest tightened. Who was she? That evening, I called my mother again. "Hey, Mom," I said casually, "how are things going with the anniversary plans?" "Oh," she said, caught off guard, "it's coming along fine." "Need any help?" No, everything's under control." "Who's helping you decorate?" There was a pause, the kind where you can almost hear the mind scrambling for the right words. "Just some people from church," she said. "Oh," I kept my tone light. "Like who?" She hesitated. Lila. You remember Lila?" The name clicked instantly. Lila was my mother's best friend when I was growing up. She'd moved away after her husband died. I hadn't seen her in years. "Yeah," I said slowly, "I remember her." "Well, she's back in town. She's been helping us organize things." That explained the blonde hair, the SUV, the way she touched my father's arm. But it didn't explain the look in his eyes when she did. I thanked my mother and hung up. Then I opened my laptop. Within minutes, I found Lila's social media profile, cheerful posts, garden photos, and most recently, a picture of her and my father standing side by side at the community hall, both smiling under the caption, "Big weekend coming up. So grateful to help celebrate true love." True love? The words stung more than they should have, because in that picture, my father didn't look like a man merely helping an old friend. He looked alive, happier than I'd seen him in years. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every thought spiraled back to that picture, to the way my mother's eyes had looked, tired, almost resigned when she told me not to come. Was she protecting me or herself? The gift box sat on my nightstand, the navy ribbon perfectly tied. I ran my fingers over it, tracing the corners. Inside was something neither of them knew I'd found, a letter my father had written years ago, and a photograph that changed everything I thought I understood about our family. I'd discovered them 6 months ago while cleaning out old boxes from their attic. At first, I'd planned to give it back, quietly, thinking it might mean something sentimental to them. But after what I'd seen, the secrecy, the distance, the strange alliance between my parents and Lila, that letter now felt like a key, and I intended to use it. On the day of the anniversary, I dressed simply, a navy dress, pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. I didn't plan to cause a scene. I only wanted answers. The community hall parking lot was full. Laughter drifted out through the open doors. I waited until the music started before walking in. The first thing I noticed was the banner, then the tables draped in white linen, then my parents standing at the center of the room smiling for photographs. And there she was, Lila, standing just behind my father, her hand resting gently on his back. I felt my pulse quicken. Someone at the door recognized me, a family friend, Mrs. Norris. "Oh, I didn't know you were coming," she said brightly. "Neither did they," I murmured. Her smile faltered, but I walked past her before she could respond. My mother turned just as I reached them. Her smile froze. "Sarah," she whispered. My father's expression hardened. I held up the cream-colored gift box. "I just came to deliver this," I said quietly. "Congratulations." Every head nearby turned. The room went still, and in that silence, I saw something flicker across my mother's face. Not anger, not guilt. Fear. Real fear. The music kept playing, but softer somehow. Or maybe it only felt that way because all I could hear was my own heartbeat. My father stepped forward first. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly, through a tight smile meant for the watching guests. "I didn't come to stay," I replied. My voice surprised me. It was calm, almost gentle. "I just brought your gift." My mother's hands trembled where they clutched the stem of her champagne glass. Leela stood slightly behind them, her expression carefully neutral, polite concern like she was witnessing a minor social mishap. But her eyes were sharp, measuring. "Sarah," my mother said under her breath, "this isn't the time." I nodded slowly. "You're right, it's not." I turned slightly so the nearby guests could hear me without my voice rising. "I just didn't want you to think I forgot. 40 years is a long time." Someone cleared their throat. A chair scraped against the floor. The trio near the stage faltered, then resumed their tune. My father reached for the gift box. I held it a second longer before letting go. It felt heavier in his hands than it looked. "We can open it later," he muttered. "I'd prefer if you opened it now." The room froze dramatically. That would have been theatrical. Instead, it shifted. Conversations dimmed. People pretended not to stare, but they were watching. My mother swallowed. "Sarah, please," I said softly. My father looked at me, really looked at me, and something unreadable passed between us. Then, with deliberate movements, he untied the navy ribbon. The paper slid away. Inside was a wooden keepsake box, old-fashioned, polished mahogany. My father recognized it instantly. His fingers stilled. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From your attic," I replied. My mother's face drained of color. Inside the wooden box were 3 things: a faded photograph, a stack of handwritten letters tied with twine, and a small velvet pouch. My father lifted the photograph first. It was taken 32 years ago. My parents stood on a beach, younger, thinner, hopeful. Between them stood Leela, only she wasn't standing slightly off to the side like in the anniversary decorations. She was holding my father's hand, not casually, intimately. My mother wasn't smiling in that photo. She looked hollow. A murmur rippled through the nearest guests. Leela took a step forward. "Thomas?" My father's jaw tightened. "Not now." He picked up the letters next. I watched his thumb trace the first envelope. They were addressed to him, in Leela's handwriting. I didn't need to read them again. I already had, months ago in the dim attic light while dust floated in the air around me. They weren't romantic in the dramatic sense. There were no declarations of eternal love. Instead, they were quieter, more dangerous. "I know you feel trapped. You deserve a life that makes you feel alive. She doesn't see you the way I do." And one line I couldn't forget. "If it weren't for the baby, things would be different." The baby. Me. My mother's breathing became uneven. She set her champagne glass down before she dropped it. "Why would you bring this here?" she whispered. "Because I didn't understand," I said. My voice finally wavered. "You told me it was complicated. I think I deserve to know why." The room was silent now. The music had stopped entirely. My father looked at Leela. She looked back at him, not ashamed, not afraid, just waiting, waiting for him to choose. And suddenly I understood. This anniversary wasn't just a celebration, it was a crossroads. My mother spoke first. "She found out 6 months ago," she said quietly, her eyes on the floor. "I didn't understand. I thought it was just old history." "It was," Leela interjected softly. "It was decades ago." "Was it?" I asked. No one answered. I reached into the box and pulled out the velvet pouch. I handed it to my mother. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring. Not her wedding ring, Leela's. I found that too, I said, tucked inside the letters. A sharp inhale from somewhere in the crowd. My father closed his eyes briefly. It was over, he said, a long time ago. Then why, I asked, keeping my voice level, did you tell Mom you needed space last year? My mother flinched. I hadn't planned to say that part, but it slipped out. There it was, the first true crack in the polished image of 40 years. Leela's composure faltered for the first time. Thomas, you said you handled this. I tried, he muttered. My mother finally lifted her head. Her eyes were glossy but steady. You told me it was just nostalgia, she said to him, that reconnecting with Leela was harmless. It was, he insisted weakly. No, it wasn't, I said quietly. I think you didn't invite me because you were afraid I'd say something or that I'd look at you differently. My father didn't deny it. My mother's shoulders sagged. I wanted one night where we could pretend everything was fine. That broke something in me more than the letters ever could. 40 years of marriage, and she was still pretending. Guests began to shift uncomfortably. Some looked sympathetic, others embarrassed, but no one spoke. This wasn't scandal, it was truth. And truth rarely shouts. It just stands there, unavoidable. My father straightened slightly, as if remembering the audience. This is private family business. Let's not turn it into... It already is, my mother interrupted gently. She looked at Leela. I loved you once, she said quietly, as a friend. Leela's lips parted, but no words came. Then my mother turned to my father. And I loved you through things I never should have had to. The silence felt sacred now, not tense, just honest. I stepped back. This wasn't revenge, I said. I didn't come to humiliate anyone. I just couldn't be excluded from my own family story. My father looked older in that moment, smaller. I didn't want you to see me like this, he admitted. I already did, I said softly, in the attic. No one moved. Then my mother did something I didn't expect. She took off her wedding ring. Not dramatically, not with fury, just quietly. She placed it on the table beside the gold ring from the velvet pouch. I can't celebrate something that isn't whole, she said. Gasps fluttered through the room. Leela stepped back. My father reached for my mother's hand, but she didn't let him take it. Not this time. No one clapped. No one shouted. The only sound in that room was the faint hum of the air conditioner and someone quietly sobbing near the back. I never found out who. My father looked at the 2 rings on the table as if they were foreign objects, as if they hadn't shaped the last 4 decades of his life. Diane, he said softly, reaching again for my mother's hand. Please, not like this. She didn't step away from him, but she didn't step closer either. For 40 years, she said, her voice steady in a way that made my chest ache, I chose this marriage every single day, even when I knew part of you was somewhere else. The words hung there. I watched Leela's face carefully. There was no smugness left now, no soft smile, only discomfort, and something else. Regret. You think I didn't know? My mother continued. I saw the way you looked at her at church picnics, the way you lit up when she laughed. My father's shoulders slumped. I stayed, she said, because we had a child, because I believed commitment meant weathering storms. Her eyes found mine for a moment, and I realized something that cut deeper than anything else. She hadn't excluded me to hurt me. She had excluded me to protect the fragile version of this marriage she'd been holding together with both hands. I didn't want you to see it fall apart, she whispered to me. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. I stepped closer to her then, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "I don't need perfect," I said quietly. "I just need honesty." My father ran a hand over his face. He looked tired, not villainous, not dramatic, just worn. "I never meant for this to become this," he said, gesturing vaguely to the room. "Then what did you mean for it to become?" I asked. That question settled heavily, because this hadn't started last week or last year. It had started decades ago, in glances, in letters, in choices that were never fully resolved. Leela finally spoke. "I came back to town because my sister got sick," she said. "I wasn't here to break anything." My mother gave a small, almost sad smile. "You didn't have to try." That wasn't cruelty. It was truth. The room felt too small now, too intimate for so many witnesses. A few guests began quietly gathering their purses and coats, offering hushed excuses about early mornings or babysitters. No one made a scene. They were giving my parents dignity, and I was grateful for that. The trio near the stage stood awkwardly with their instruments, unsure whether to pack up. My father glanced at them and gave a small nod. They began quietly dismantling their equipment. The celebration was over, but the real reckoning was just beginning. My father picked up the photograph again. He stared at it longer this time. "I was young," he said. "I thought love was supposed to feel consuming, like fire." "And what did you think this was?" my mother asked gently. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Safe," he admitted. That word hit the air like a dropped plate. Safe. Not passionate, not consuming. Safe. My mother absorbed it without flinching. "I gave you safe. I gave you steady. I gave you loyalty." "You did," he whispered, "and you resented me for it." He didn't answer, because he didn't have to. I suddenly understood something I hadn't before. My parents' marriage hadn't been a fairy tale, but it hadn't been fake either. It had been built on duty, on partnership, on raising me. But somewhere along the line, my father had mourned the version of his life he didn't choose, and Leela represented that ghost. "I didn't plan to leave," he said quietly. "Not then, not now. But you kept the door open," my mother replied. That was the truest thing said all evening. You don't need to walk through a door to betray someone. Sometimes leaving it unlocked is enough. Eventually, only a handful of people remained, close family, Aunt Ellen among them. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not approval, support. Leela stepped forward one last time. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she said, and for the first time her voice trembled. "Thomas, I thought if you were unhappy—" "I wasn't unhappy," he interrupted quickly. My mother gave him a long look. He exhaled. "I was restless," he corrected. There it was again, not evil, not monstrous, just human weakness dressed up as nostalgia. Leela swallowed. "I should go." No one stopped her. As she walked toward the exit, she passed me. For a second, our eyes met. There was no hatred there, just the quiet understanding that sometimes timing doesn't erase consequence. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and suddenly the room felt lighter, not healed, but clearer. My mother sank into one of the chairs. The white linen tablecloth was slightly wrinkled now, the champagne glasses half full, the cake untouched. 40 years, reduced to silence and 2 rings on a table. I pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. My father remained standing for a moment, then slowly took the seat across from us. We didn't speak right away. For the first time in a long time, there were no roles to play, no perfect family portrait, just 3 people trying to understand what came next. "I didn't invite you," he said finally, looking at me, "because I was ashamed." That word surprised me. "I thought if you saw me reconnecting with Leela, you'd think less of me. I didn't want to lose your respect." "You did, but not because of her," I said gently. He nodded, absorbing that. I lost it because I lied, he said. Yes. My mother reached for my hand under the table. Her fingers were cool. I should have told you the truth months ago, instead of pretending it was nothing. I squeezed her hand. I'm not a child anymore, I told her. You don't have to protect me from reality. A faint, tired smile crossed her face. I know that now. The hall was nearly empty when my father picked up his wedding ring from the table. He didn't put it back on. He simply held it in his palm. I don't know what happens next, he said quietly. Neither did I, neither did my mother. But for the first time that evening, uncertainty didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like honesty. And sometimes that's the first step towards something real.
We didn't drive home together that night. My mother left first. She hugged Aunt Ellen tightly, whispered something I couldn't hear, and walked to her car alone. Her back was straight, but her steps were slower than usual, as if each one carried the weight of 40 years. My father stayed behind to help stack chairs, the wall. That's exactly how it felt. He nodded. He didn't argue. That was new. I thought if you weren't here, he continued, then maybe the past wouldn't come with you. I looked at him. I am the past. He flinched at that, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Everything they'd built, every compromise they'd made, had been for me. Or at least that's what they told themselves. You were never a burden, he said quickly, as if reading my thoughts. I know, I replied softly. But I was the reason you stayed. He didn't deny that either. The truth, when it finally surfaces, doesn't need decoration. It just sits there between you. The next morning, I went to my mother's house. Not to confront, not to pry, just to see her. She was in the kitchen again, the same kitchen where this had started. The smell of coffee lingered in the air. Her eyes were puffy, but her posture was calm. You didn't sleep, I said gently. Neither did you, she replied. We shared a faint smile. I sat at the table while she poured us both coffee. The ticking of the wall clock felt louder than usual. Are you leaving him? I asked carefully. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stirred her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. I don't know, she said finally. I've spent so many years convincing myself that commitment means endurance. And now? She looked at me, really looked at me, not as her child, but as another woman. Now I'm wondering if commitment should also mean honesty, she said. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You deserve more than being someone's safe choice. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I stayed because I loved him, she said, and because I believed he loved me. I think he does, I admitted, but maybe not in the way you needed. That was the hardest truth of all. Love can exist and still not be enough. My father called me 2 days later. Can we talk? He asked. We met at the park where he used to push me on the swings when I was little. It felt strange, sitting across from him on a wooden bench instead of at the head of a dinner table. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just stripped of certainty. I told your mother everything, he said. Everything? Yes. I studied his face. And? She's staying at Ellen's for a few days. I nodded. She says she needs to figure out whether she stayed all these years out of love or fear. That sentence settled into my chest. Fear of being alone. Fear of failure. Fear of starting over. I never cheated, he said quietly. I know, I replied. Emotionally? He added. I held his gaze. Yes. He looked down at his hands. I think I kept Lila in my life because she reminded me of who I was before responsibility, before bills, before routine. And what did Mom represent? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Reality. There at love again. Safe. Reality. Not words meant to wound, but words that revealed everything. Do you regret marrying her? I asked carefully. His head snapped up. No, never. Then what do you regret? He thought for a long moment. Not choosing her fully, he said at last. That was the most honest thing he'd said since all this began. The weeks that followed weren't dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no lawyers storming in, No dramatic ultimatums. Just conversations. Slow, difficult, necessary. My parents began seeing a counselor, something my father had always scoffed at before. My mother moved back home after 2 weeks, but she kept her ring in her jewelry box. I need to put it back on because I want to, she told me one afternoon, not because I feel obligated. I respected that. Lila left town quietly. I heard she went back to stay with her sister permanently. She never contacted my father again. Not because he told her not to, but because for the first time he closed the door himself. One evening, about a month later, my parents invited me over for dinner. The atmosphere felt different, not tense, just honest. My father cooked. Cooked the chicken slightly, as usual. My mother laughed at him for it, and he didn't bristle. He laughed too. Halfway through dinner, he reached across the table and took her hand. Not out of habit, out of intention. "I want to choose you," he said simply. My mother's eyes softened. "Then choose me when it's boring," she replied. "Choose me when it's routine. Choose me when I'm not exciting." "I will," he said. And this time I believed him. Because it wasn't about passion or nostalgia anymore. It was about accountability. As for me, something shifted inside me too. For years I had quietly carried the belief that I was the glue holding their marriage together, that if I wasn't there, it might unravel. Finding those letters had shaken that belief. But watching them face each other, without pretense, without hiding, reminded me of something important. Their marriage was never mine to carry. It was theirs. And sometimes, love doesn't survive because it's perfect. It survives because people finally stop pretending.
A month after the anniversary, the town stopped whispering. At first, there had been quiet curiosity. Small town conversations always find their way to the surface. At the grocery store, after church, over coffee at the diner. "Such a shame," someone had murmured behind me in the produce aisle one afternoon. 40 years is a long time," another voice replied softly. But what surprised me wasn't the gossip. It was the tone. There was no scandal in it, no hunger for drama, just a kind of collective discomfort, as if people were forced to confront the fragile truth that even the most solid marriages have cracks. My parents didn't hide. They went to church together the following Sunday. They attended a neighborhood barbecue the week after. They didn't pretend nothing had happened, but they didn't offer explanations either. And slowly, the whispers faded. Because when you face something openly, there's less for others to invent. One evening, my mother invited a few close friends over for tea, including Aunt Ellen and Mrs. Norris. I almost declined the invitation when she asked me to come too, not because I was avoiding them, but because I wasn't sure what role I played now. Was I the daughter who exposed everything? The catalyst? The disruptor? But I went. When I walked into the living room, the air smelled of chamomile and baked shortbread. The curtains were open, letting in the warm glow of sunset. It felt normal. "Sarah, darling," Mrs. Norris said, patting the seat beside her. "Sit." There was no tension in her voice, just kindness. For a moment, conversation stayed light. Weather, grandchildren, a new bakery opening downtown. Then Aunt Ellen set her teacup down gently. "I think," she said calmly, "we should acknowledge what happened." The room quieted. My mother nodded. "We had problems," she said plainly. "We're working on them." Mrs. Norris reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's all anyone can do." There was no judgment, no dramatic sympathy. Just a circle of women who understood that long-term love isn't a fairy tale, it's maintenance. It took almost 6 months before my mother put her ring back on. She didn't announce it. There was no ceremony, no dramatic moment in the kitchen with tears and violins playing in the background. It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I had stopped by after work, still in my cardigan from the library, my hair slightly windblown. My father was in the backyard trimming the hedges, the steady snip-snip of the clippers drifting through the open window. My mother was at the sink, washing strawberries. I noticed it when she reached for a bowl. The gold band caught the light. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched the way her fingers moved, unhurried, steady. Finally, I asked softly, "Does it feel different?" She smiled faintly without turning around. "Yes." "How?" "It feels like something I chose this time," she said. Not something she endured. Not something she wore out of duty. Something she chose. That was the difference between surviving a marriage and rebuilding one. My father changed too.
though not in dramatic overnight ways. He began showing up intentionally. He brought my mother flowers on ordinary Tuesdays, not anniversaries. He asked her questions and actually listened to the answers. He stopped referring to their early years as the best time and started calling this chapter our honest years. That phrase stayed with me. Our honest years. Because honesty doesn't erase pain, but it transforms it. There were still awkward moments. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of insecurity in my mother's eyes if Lila's name came up in town. Sometimes my father would fall silent, wrestling with guilt that hadn't fully loosened its grip. Healing isn't linear, but it was real. As for me, something inside me shifted too. For years, I had quietly believed that I was responsible for holding my family together, that if I asked too many questions or exposed uncomfortable truths, I would break something fragile. That night at the anniversary taught me something else. Silence doesn't preserve love. It suffocates it. I had been afraid to confront them for fear of losing them, but confrontation, when done with dignity, had saved us from living inside a lie. I started examining my own patterns after that. In my marriage to Daniel, I had also chosen safe over honest. I had ignored restlessness, both his and mine, because routine felt easier than truth. Watching my parents face their fractures made me realize something painful. I had left my marriage quietly, without ever demanding clarity, without ever asking the hard questions. So I began asking them of myself. What do I actually want? What am I afraid to say? What version of love am I settling for? Those questions didn't lead to instant transformation, but they led to awareness. And awareness is where growth begins. One Sunday evening, almost a year after the anniversary, we gathered again at the community hall. This time, it wasn't for a celebration. It was for a volunteer fundraiser my mother had helped organize. The hall looked different without fairy lights and banners, simpler, more grounded. As I stood near the entrance greeting guests, I watched my parents across the room. They weren't clinging to each other. They weren't performing. They were simply standing side by side, talking to neighbors. My father leaned toward my mother as she laughed at something someone said. She nudged him playfully in return. It wasn't dramatic passion. It was companionship, chosen, not assumed. At one point, my father walked over to me. "You were brave that night," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. I was hurt. "Sometimes that's the same thing," he replied. I looked at him carefully. "Are you happy?" He didn't rush his answer. "Yes," he said finally. "Not because everything is easy, but because nothing is hidden." That was enough. Later that evening, my mother pulled me aside. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "for a long time I thought protecting you meant shielding you from our flaws." I nodded. "But now I see that letting you witness them and how we work through them might have been the better lesson." I swallowed. "What lesson is that?" "That love isn't about perfection," she said. "It's about accountability." That word again. Accountability. Not blame. Not shame. Ownership. There are people who would say I ruined their anniversary. Maybe in a way I did. There was no dancing that night. No cake-cutting photos framed on the mantel. But what we gained was something far more valuable than a polished celebration. We gained clarity. And clarity is uncomfortable. It forces you to see the cracks you've been painting over for years. It asks you to choose, not out of fear, not out of habit, but out of intention. My parents didn't magically become a perfect couple after that. They became an honest one. And that honesty made room for something new. Not the fiery, consuming kind of love my father once chased in memory, but a steady, conscious kind. The kind that says, I see your flaws, I see mine, and I'm still here. As for Lila, I don't think of her with anger anymore. She wasn't a villain in a dramatic story. She was a symbol of unfinished choices. Sometimes people enter your life not to steal something, but to expose what was never fully resolved. And once it's resolved, they fade. On the second anniversary after that night, the quiet, unannounced one, my parents invited me to dinner. Just the three of us. No banners, no band, no pretending. My father raised his glass and said, "To honesty." My mother added softly, "And to choosing each other." They clinked glasses. Then my father looked at me. "And to you, for refusing to stay silent." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't meant to be brave. I had only meant to be seen.
I've replayed that night in my mind more times than I can count. Not because I regret what I did, but because I understand now how close we came to losing something that mattered. If I had driven home that afternoon, if I had mailed the gift instead of carrying it into that room, if I had swallowed my hurt the way my mother had swallowed hers for years, we would still be smiling in photographs and quietly unraveling.
There's something about family that makes silence feel noble. We tell ourselves we're protecting each other. We say, it's not worth the fight. We convince ourselves that love means keeping the peace. But peace built on avoidance isn't peace, it's postponement. What I learned that night is that truth doesn't destroy strong relationships. It reveals whether they're strong at all. When my parents said, "We didn't invite you," it felt like rejection. But beneath that rejection was fear. My father was afraid of being seen as flawed. My mother was afraid of losing what she'd spent decades building. And I was afraid of not belonging anymore. Fear makes people hide, and hiding makes people drift. It took one uncomfortable moment, one gift box opened in a quiet room, to force us all into the light. And light can be blinding at first, but it also heals. I don't tell this story to shame my parents. I tell it because I love them, because I saw them at their weakest, and I saw them choose accountability instead of pride. That's not something you see every day. Marriage after 40 years isn't about fireworks. It's about whether two people are willing to look at each other and say, "I failed here," and still reach across the table. It's about closing doors that should have been closed long ago. It's about understanding that nostalgia is not a substitute for commitment. And maybe, most importantly, it's about realizing that children, even grown ones, deserve truth. We don't need perfect parents. We need honest ones. Since that night, I've carried a new standard into my own relationships. When something feels off, I speak. When something hurts, I name it. Not loudly, not cruelly, but clearly. Because silence is easier in the moment and far more expensive in the long run. My parents still have disagreements. They still roll their eyes at each other sometimes. My father still overcooks chicken. My mother still rearranges the living room every spring like she's chasing some invisible symmetry. But now, when I walk into their kitchen, it feels different. There's no careful performance, no unspoken tension hiding under polite smiles. There's laughter that sounds unguarded. There's eye contact that doesn't flinch. There's a kind of softness that only comes after something almost breaks and doesn't. Sometimes I think about that velvet pouch, the gold ring that once symbolized a door left slightly open. It's gone now, not thrown away, just returned to its rightful owner in a quiet final exchange. And the wooden keepsake box, my father asked me to keep it. Consider it proof, he said, that secrets don't stay buried forever. He wasn't wrong. They don't. The question is whether we let them rot in the dark or bring them into the open while there's still something left to save. So I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed silent to protect someone, only to realize you were protecting the wrong thing? Have you ever been excluded, dismissed, or told it's complicated when your heart knew the truth was simpler than that? Would you have walked into that anniversary party? Would you have handed over the box? Or would you have driven away and let the celebration continue? I don't think there's one right answer, but I do believe this. Love that survives honesty is stronger than love that survives silence. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own crossroads, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe in conversations that heal instead of hide, stay with me. There are more stories to tell.